New York, 1929, a city that pulsed with the promise of the American dream, where skyscrapers touched the sky and prosperity seemed to have no limits. It was an era of unbridled optimism, technological innovations, and an unwavering belief in progress. But, in the blink of an eye, this illusion shattered. What was once a golden glow transformed into a dark shadow. This is the story of how the American dream crumbled for millions, and how a working-class family fought to survive in the ruins of an era, specifically in the brutal first months of the Great Depression. To understand the depth of the fall, we must first comprehend the height from which it fell. The 1920s, known as the Roaring Twenties, were a decade of unprecedented euphoria in the United States. World War I had ended, and America emerged as a global power. Henry Ford's automobile industry, mass production, the rise of radio and cinema all fueled a sense of unstoppable progress. Credit was easy, and the stock market seemed a sure path to wealth. Ordinary people, from all classes, invested their savings, dreaming of a better life, of owning a home, of their children's education. The American dream was not just a phrase, it was a tangible belief, a promise that, with hard work, anyone could ascend socially and economically. New York, in particular, was the epicenter of this optimism, with Wall Street as its beating heart. The city was a melting pot of cultures and ambitions, where immigrants from all over the world arrived with the hope of building a new life, of leaving behind the poverty and oppression of their homelands. They worked tirelessly, often in precarious conditions, but with a vision of a brighter future for their descendants. Consumer culture flourished, driven by advertising and easy access to goods once considered luxuries. Appliances, cars, fashionable clothes, everything seemed within reach, fueling the idea that prosperity was for everyone. Jazz music echoed through dance halls, flappers challenged social conventions, and life seemed like an endless party. However, behind the glitter and glamour, there were invisible cracks, a bubble about to burst. Stock market speculation reached dangerous levels, with many investing money they didn't have, driven by a blind confidence that stock prices could only go up. Wealth distribution was unequal, and the economic base, though seemingly solid, was vulnerable to shocks. Agriculture was already struggling, and overproduction in some industries began to show warning signs. But the euphoria was so great that few paid attention to the warnings. The belief in American exceptionalism and its ability to overcome any obstacle was almost religious. The idea that prosperity was an acquired right, not a privilege, permeated society. Then came the day. October 24, 1929, Black Thursday, was the first warning sign. The stock market plummeted, causing panic. But it was on Black Tuesday, October 29th, that the nightmare materialized. Billions of dollars evaporated in a matter of hours. It was not just a financial collapse. It was a psychological collapse. Confidence, the backbone of any economy, was pulverized. Suddenly, a lifetime's investments turned to dust. Companies saw their values plummet. Banks, which had lent money for risky investments, began to fail. The domino effect was brutal and relentless. The news spread like wildfire, not just through the halls of Wall Street, but through every home, every factory, every corner of New York and the country. For the common family, for the working-class family who barely had enough to live on, but who perhaps had a small savings fund or a relative who invested, the crash was not just distant news from Wall Street. It was the harbinger of an imminent personal catastrophe. Newspaper headlines screamed despair, and the city's atmosphere changed overnight. Laughter gave way to worry, hope to uncertainty. The global economy, already interconnected, began to feel the effects, transforming an American crisis into a worldwide depression. Faith in the capitalist system was shaken, and people began to question everything they had been promised. The crash of 1929 was not just an economic event. It was a watershed moment in American history, marking the end of an era of innocence and the beginning of a period of unprecedented trials. To illustrate the reality of this era, let's meet the O'Malley family. They are not a real family, but a composite of thousands of true stories, a mirror of New York's working class. Patrick O'Malley, the father, was a strong, hard-working Irish immigrant who found employment on the Brooklyn docks. His wife, Mary, took care of the home and their 3 young children. Liam, 8, the eldest and a dreamer. Bridget, 6, the smartest and most curious. And little Sean, just 2 years old. They lived in a small two-room apartment in a tenement in the Lower East Side of Manhattan, a densely populated neighborhood of immigrants and laborers. Conditions were cramped, with little natural light or ventilation, and basic sanitation was poor. Rent was tight, food was simple, but there was a sense of community and the hope that with each day of Patrick's hard work, life would improve. Patrick's modest wage was the family's anchor. He worked long hours, loading and unloading ships, an exhausting and dangerous job, but one that put food on the table. Mary, in turn, was the household manager, stretching every penny, mending clothes, cooking nutritious meals with as little as possible. She was the silent force behind the family, the guardian of the home and of hope. Life was hard, but they had a roof over their heads and food. However little, they represented the backbone of the city, the workers who built and kept New York running. The American dream for them was not about getting rich on the stock market, but about having stability, security, and the chance for their children to have a slightly better life than theirs. They dreamed of an education for Liam and Bridget, of a future where they wouldn't have to face the same hardships. But the crash of 1929 was about to test that hope to its limit, transforming their modest dreams into a daily struggle for mere survival. Life in the tenements was a microcosm of the working-class struggle, where physical proximity forced interaction and often solidarity among neighbors who shared the same difficulties. The O'Malley family, with their faith and determination, was about to face a storm that would change their lives forever. In the first months after the crash, life for the O'Malleys did not drastically change overnight, but warning signs began to emerge. Patrick noticed that shifts on the docks were decreasing. From 5 days a week, it dropped to 4, then to 3. His already tight wage shrank further. Uncertainty hung in the air like a cold mist. Neighbors began talking about mass layoffs in textile factories and construction sites. The neighborhood stores, once bustling, now seemed emptier, with fewer customers and less stocked shelves. Mary felt the budget squeeze. The price of bread and milk, once stable, began to fluctuate unpredictably, always upwards. She had to be even more ingenious to feed the family, seeking the cheapest deals and performing miracles with what she had. The children, though young, began to feel the tension. Liam overheard his parents' worried whispers at night, and noticed the absence of laughter and play that once filled the house. Bridget noticed the absence of small luxuries, like an occasional sweet or a new toy. The hope for a better life, once a beacon, began to flicker intermittently, threatening to go out. The Great Depression did not arrive with a bang for the O'Malley family. It silently infiltrated, eroding the foundations of their already fragile security. The fear of unemployment, hunger, and eviction began to become a palpable reality, not just a distant concern. Conversations in the streets and markets were about the crisis, about who had lost their job, about the banks that had closed. Vibrant, promise-filled New York was transforming into a city of shadows and uncertainties, and the O'Malley family was about to face the greatest challenge of their lives, a challenge that would test their faith, their unity, and their capacity to resist. For Patrick O'Malley, the inevitable happened in the last months of 1929. One day, upon arriving at the docks, he was informed there was no work. The next day, the same thing the next. Intermittent work turned into total unemployment. The news hit the family like a blow. Patrick's wage, however modest, was the sole source of income. Without it, the family was on the brink of an abyss. Unemployment during the Great Depression was not just the absence of a wage. It was the loss of dignity, purpose, identity. Men who once prided themselves on supporting their families now felt useless, ashamed, their self-esteem in tatters. Patrick, a strong and proud man, spent his days walking the streets of New York, back and forth, searching for any kind of work. He offered his services at construction sites, in stores, anywhere that might need a pair of hands. But the answers were always the same. No openings, we're laying off, not hiring. The lines of unemployed, which had once been sporadic, now stretched 4 blocks. A desolate sight of frustrated hopes, of men and women with faces marked by worry and exhaustion. With each passing day without work, Patrick's hope diminished, and Mary's worry grew. The silence in the house, once filled with children's joy, was now heavy, laden with anxiety and fear of the future. Job loss was the first step into a downward spiral that many could not reverse, leading to extreme poverty and hopelessness. The unemployment rate, which had already been rising, soared in the last months of 1929, affecting millions of Americans. In New York, the situation was equally dire, with thousands of families facing the same reality as the O'Malleys. Competition for any odd job was fierce, and the supply of work was minimal. A man's dignity was measured by his ability to provide for his family, and when that ability was taken away, the psychological impact was devastating. Many men, unable to cope with the shame, began to withdraw, becoming ghosts in their own homes. Patrick, however, persisted, driven by his love for Mary and the children. Even as each closed door eroded a little more of his soul, and the winter of 1929 approached, bringing with it a new layer of concern. With Patrick's unemployment, food became the #1 concern. Money for rent and basic bills was already scarce, but hunger was a constant and immediate threat, a physical pain that could not be ignored. Soup kitchens, maintained by charities and churches, which previously served a limited number of people, now saw their lines grow exponentially in the final months of 1929. Mary O'Malley, her dignity wounded but driven by love for her children, joined the daily queues, hours of waiting in the cold or heat, just to receive a thin bowl of soup and a piece of bread. The humiliation was immense, but the need was greater. At home, Mary had to be a true alchemist. She stretched every ingredient, transforming leftovers into new meals, using potatoes, onions, and whatever else she could find or receive. Creativity in the kitchen was a matter of survival. The children, especially Liam and Bridget, felt the hunger. Little Sean, still a baby, was the most vulnerable, and his fragile health was a constant source of worry. Malnutrition, though not yet widespread, began to show its first signs, and diseases, once controlled, returned to haunt poor communities, with the lack of essential vitamins and nutrients weakening the immune system. Meat was a forgotten luxury. Fresh fruits and vegetables were rarities. The diet was monotonous and deficient, based on cheap and low-nutrient carbohydrates. Children went to school on empty stomachs, which affected their learning and energy, making concentration and performance difficult. The American dream of abundance and prosperity had been replaced by a reality of scarcity and deprivation. Hunger was not just a physical sensation. It was a psychological weight that crushed the spirit, stealing joy and hope, and leaving deep marks on the memory of those who experienced it. Breadlines and soup kitchens became symbols of the Depression, places where dignity was tested and solidarity, at times, flourished amidst despair. Already by the end of 1929, if hunger was a constant threat, eviction was the nightmare that haunted every working-class family. Rent, however low, was an unbearable burden without a regular income. The O'Malleys lived in a tenement, a type of multifamily housing common in New York, characterized by small, poorly lit, poorly ventilated apartments, often without adequate sanitation. Privacy was an unknown luxury, and overcrowding was the norm. With Patrick's unemployment, rent became a growing debt. The landlord, often an immigrant also struggling to survive, could not afford to be charitable, as he himself depended on rent to pay his own bills and mortgages. Scenes of families being evicted, their few belongings thrown into the street, were common and terrifying. A public spectacle of misery that affected everyone, and which intensified in the last months of 1929. For the O'Malleys, the idea of losing the only roof over their heads was terrifying. Where would they go? The streets of New York offered no shelter. Although Hoovervilles were not yet a widespread reality in 1929, the threat of becoming homeless was real and immediate. The dignity of having a home, however humble, was constantly under threat. Mary tried to negotiate with the landlord, offering small jobs in exchange for more time, but the pressure was relentless. With each knock on the door, the family's heart raced, fearing the arrival of the bailiff. The home, which should have been a refuge, became a place of anxiety and fear, where security was a fragile illusion. Life in the tenements, already difficult, became unbearable with the crisis, transforming these buildings into symbols of hopelessness and the struggle for survival, where disease spread easily and hygiene was a constant challenge, especially with the arrival of winter. Children, the most innocent and vulnerable, suffered the most from the Great Depression. For Liam, Bridget, and Sean, childhood was stolen, replaced by a reality of deprivation and premature responsibility. Already, in the last months of 1929, Liam, at just 8 years old, felt the weight of responsibility. He tried to help his father look for work, sold old newspapers, did odd jobs to bring a few cents home. School, once a place of learning and play, became a constant reminder of hunger and the shame of not having adequate clothes or school supplies. Often, he had to miss school to help the family. Bridget, younger, tried to keep spirits up, but the lack of food and tension at home deeply affected her. She helped her mother with chores and took care of her younger brother, assuming adult responsibilities too early. Little Sean, with his fragile health, was the most worried. Malnutrition made him sick frequently, and access to doctors and medicine was almost impossible, as the few resources were directed towards food. Although the infant mortality rate had not yet soared in 1929, the vulnerability of children was palpable. The American dream promised a better future for children, but the reality of the Depression delivered a childhood of deprivation and uncertainty. Joy and innocence were replaced by premature maturity and a struggle for survival that no child should have to face, forcing them to grow up too fast in a world that had failed them. Beyond hunger and unemployment, the Great Depression had a devastating impact on people's mental health. Despair, shame, a sense of failure, and a lack of perspective corroded the soul. Patrick, once a cheerful and optimistic man, became quiet and withdrawn. The guilt of not being able to support his family consumed him, and he isolated himself in his own dark thoughts. Mary, though strong, felt the weight of anxiety and uncertainty, and the constant worry about the family's future left her exhausted. Depression was a silent epidemic, often unrecognized or untreated, as the priority was physical survival. The social stigma of being poor or unemployed was immense, leading many to isolate themselves, to hide their situation from friends and family. The suicide rate, though not yet at its peak, already showed a worrying increase in the final months of 1929, and hope, for many, seemed to have completely disappeared, replaced by an existential void. Society, which once celebrated individual success, now viewed failure as a personal flaw, ignoring the systemic causes of the crisis and blaming the victims. The American dream not only collapsed economically, but also psychologically. leaving a trail of broken hearts and tormented minds. Resilience was tested daily, and for many, the line between hope and despair was thin and easily broken, leading to nervous breakdowns and mental illnesses that did not receive proper care. Loneliness and isolation were constant companions for those who felt abandoned by the system and society. Already in the first months of the crisis, amidst adversity, the community became a refuge. In the Lower East Side, where the O'Malleys lived, solidarity was a necessity, not a luxury. Neighbors, many of them immigrants who had already faced hardships in their homelands, understood each other's struggles. An extra bowl of soup, a shared piece of bread, a helping hand to carry the few belongings of an evicted family. These were the acts of kindness that kept the flame of humanity alive. Churches and synagogues, once centers of faith, also became social assistance centers, offering soup kitchens, temporary shelters, and clothing, and saw their demand explode in the last months of 1929. Charitable organizations, like the Salvation Army, worked tirelessly to alleviate suffering, reaching out to those most in need. Mary O'Malley found solace and support in her neighbors. They shared tips on where to find cheaper food, how to stretch meager ingredients, and, most importantly, they shared their pains and hopes, offering a sympathetic ear and words of encouragement. The exchange of information about possible odd jobs for Patrick, or where to get used clothes for the children, was vital. An informal support network that functioned where the government had not yet articulated an effective response. Solidarity did not solve the crisis, but it made life bearable. It reinforced the idea that they were not alone, that there was a support network. However, fragile, a demonstration of the strength of the human spirit in times of crisis. This community unity was a fundamental pillar for the survival of many families. A testament to the human capacity to help each other in the darkest moments, creating bonds that would last far beyond that year. The exchange of favors, the care for each other's children, and the sharing of scarce resources were common practices that cemented social cohesion in a period of economic disintegration. Even without a steady job, Patrick O'Malley did not give up. He took any odd job that came his way in the final months of 1929, carrying boxers for a few coins, cleaning streets, helping with small repairs. These were sporadic, poorly paid jobs, but every cent was a victory, a temporary relief from constant pressure. Mary, in turn, used her skills. She began sewing and mending clothes for neighbors in exchange for food or a few pennies, transforming her skill into a small source of income or barter. She became a household jack of all trades, fixing what she could, reusing everything from old clothes to scraps of wood to avoid unnecessary expenses. The children also contributed. Liam, with his shrewdness, discovered he could earn a few cents selling old newspapers or shining shoes, feeling useful and responsible. Bridget helped her mother with chores and took care of Sean, assuming a small adult role. Life was a constant reinvention. Entertainment, once accessible, was now a luxury. Families gathered to listen to the radio, tell stories, sing, creating their own forms of leisure and escapism. Toys were made from scraps. Imagination was the main resource, and playing in the streets, though dangerous, was the only form of fun. These small victories, these acts of reinvention, were crucial for maintaining morale. They showed that, despite everything, there was still agency. There was still a way to fight, to exert some control over their lives. The American dream of wealth and prosperity had been replaced by a dream of survival, where each day of food on the table and a roof over their heads was a monumental achievement. Resilience was not just about enduring. It was about adapting, innovating, and finding joy in the small things, in family unity and community solidarity. The ability to find creative solutions to daily problems, to turn little into enough, was a striking characteristic of that year, a testament to human tenacity in the face of adversity. Politics and the hope for change in 1929 were still nascent and limited. President Herbert Hoover's government, following a philosophy of non-intervention, believed that the crisis would be temporary and that the market would adjust itself. Government actions were minimal and focused on encouraging private initiative and local charity. Without a massive federal response, for Patrick O'Malley and millions of other unemployed, this lack of government action was frustrating and despairing. There were no large-scale employment programs, nor social safety nets like those that would emerge years later. The hope for intervention that could alleviate suffering was a distant murmur, not a tangible reality. Families like the O'Malleys depended almost exclusively on their own efforts and community solidarity. Faith in the political system was being shaken, and frustration with government inaction began to grow. The American dream was not just about individual prosperity, but also about belief in a system that offered opportunities and protection. In 1929, that belief was being severely tested. The absence of a robust government response meant that the struggle was even more solitary and arduous for working-class families. Uncertainty about the future was total, and the prospect that the crisis could extend for years was a terrifying thought that began to settle in people's minds. Politics, at that moment, offered few solutions and much apprehension, leaving the population at the mercy of economic forces and their own capacity for resistance. The immediate legacy of the Depression in 1929 was shock and uncertainty. There were no lessons learned yet, only the harsh reality of an unprecedented crisis. For the O'Malley family, and for millions of others, the experience of that year was a baptism by fire. It taught valuable lessons about resilience, about the importance of community, and about the fragility of prosperity. But these lessons were being lived in real time, with the pain and confusion of the moment. The American dream was redefined not by policies or programs, but by the brutal necessity of survival. It was no longer about getting rich quickly, but about having security, stability, a decent job, a home, education for children, and the guarantee that, in times of crisis, there would be a support network. But this redefinition was an aspiration, not a reality in 1929. Patrick and Mary O'Malley, though marked by the experience, emerged stronger, with a renewed appreciation for the simple things in life, for family unity, and for the ability to overcome adversity. Their children, Liam, Bridget, and Sean, were growing up in a world that had changed drastically in a matter of months, and would carry with them the memories and lessons of their parents, understanding the value of work, economy, and solidarity. The story of the O'Malley family is a powerful reminder that, even in the most desperate circumstances, the human spirit can find ways to resist, adapt, and rebuild hope. The Great Depression was a dark chapter that was just beginning in 1929, but it was already a testament to humanity's incredible capacity for overcoming. A period that, despite all the pain, began to forge a nation more aware of its social and economic responsibilities. Scars were forming, and the lesson that unity and persistence can overcome the greatest adversities was being written on the skin of every family. That year ended with more questions than answers, with the faint hope that the next year would bring some relief, but with the certainty that life would never be the same.